Welcome back. You are watching Front Row. Now, culture, economic hardships and lack of accurate data on the plight of girls living with disability continue to hamper access to education for many girls. Now, a report by the Forum for African Women Educationalists in Kenya, FAWEC, shows that majority of girls in emergency situation areas like Turkana suffer a lot due to inadequate data on their challenges in access to education.
The research sought to understand the extent to which policymakers have produced or used quality data to drive equitable and coordinated provision of education for girls and women. Interviews were conducted with a wide range of key stakeholders, both at the national and county government levels and other non-state actors. Research findings by the Forum for African Women Educationalists in Kenya, FAWEC, underscored the need for data-driven advocacy for girls' education in emergencies.
We have a lot of challenges, especially with regard to data on pregnancies, early pregnancies, or teenage pregnancies, child marriages.
Quite a number of them have missed out on education because of what we are terming as STBV, sexual and gender-based violence.
So as an organization, we are really working very closely with the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, and even State Department of Gender to be able to consolidate this data and use them to advocate for policy change and also policy implementation at the county level and at the national level.
Data on sensitive issues pertaining to girls' education in emergencies such as teenage pregnancies and early marriages still remain very difficult to access and collect. Families conceal such data to avoid follow-up and investigations from regulatory authorities specifically on issues such as teenage pregnancies, with many fearing the impact of high stigma attached to adolescent pregnancies.
Parents have not been empowered on how to take care of these children, how to take them to school, and the need for them to also realize right to education. And that's why we are saying that together with the National Cluster for Education in Emergency, we are really aiming at ensuring that we bring all these stakeholders together so that we can be able to see on how to have one data that is not disjointed.
Lack of knowledge on the importance and value of educating girls, especially in regions that are deeply rooted in cultural practices that usually sideline girls or assign them different responsibilities, such as childbearing and housekeeping, brings about less access to education, with many girls forced to play parental roles and are withdrawn from school quite often. Girls living with disabilities in emergency zones could be missing out on the benefits of important programs such as affirmative action scholarships, targeting them due to lack of accurate data on them. Urban refugee girls living in such areas as Eastleigh in Nairobi are also said to be suffering from challenges of inadequate access to education.
There is actually need for more data to be collected on children living with disability so that when we have programs, then these data can be able to be put in a way that can address the challenges that are affecting children living with disability.
Non-state actors like FAWEC Kenya, policymakers and other stakeholders in the education sector are now planning to convene a national advocacy forum to push for the improved collection and use of data and evidence by the government ministries, UN agencies and NGOs to influence and advocate for equitable and coordinated provision of education for girls. Shadrach Miti, KTN News.
All right. Thank you, Shadrach Miti, for that story. And of course, remember, you can be a part of this conversation by answering the question we're asking you on our Twitter poll tonight. What needs to be done to ensure access to education for all? Based on your experience, tell us what you think. What needs to be done to ensure access to education for all? Currently, not all girls, not all boys are able to access quality education. And of course, as we talk about this, we are here in studio with our special panel that's going to help, or rather with regard to children living with disability.
So it doesn't come as a surprise to me because I work in the refugee context to begin with, and that is what the situation is like. I work for an organization called World University Service of Canada, and we work in the refugee communities, but we also have host community schools.
Right.
So this is what I experience every other day. So here is my reaction. First of all, the reason why those girls are in where they are is because of political marginalization, that the communities are actually marginalized in terms of economic investments, in terms of development, in terms of access to education, and so on. So when schools were being built in other regions of Kenya,
left out.
You know, these counties in the northern Kenya are, you know, were left out. And that was a political decision. I keep hearing marginalized communities, and I keep thinking, at what point will we say those that we have marginalized, rather than saying marginalized, as though it is someone else who is doing the marginalization. And that marginalization, therefore, makes these communities extremely vulnerable to you know, whatever disasters that come, whether it is the floods, whether it is cattle rustling, or, you know, whatever kind of disasters that happen. Now, for the girls, they are particularly more vulnerable, and especially if they live with special needs, because they are then doubly marginalized. Because they live in a community that is marginalized, but this community also marginalizes kids, young girls with special needs. So this,
and then when they are girls, it's almost like triple marginalization.
It is actually triple, because then they have the, you know, they have the needs, they have things that they need to be able to function as a young woman, as a member of community. But then most parents will hide them. They'll keep them at home, and therefore these girls will not be able to have access to the sanitary towels that are being donated to schools, or any other intervention that happens at the school level. Meaning that if we are going to reach these girls, we need to focus our interventions at the community level, not just at the school. Because when we do that at the school, we are able to reach those who are in the school, but we don't know what's happening to those that are not within the school. And one of the things that needs to happen is to think about the economics, the economics of the family at that particular level, because sometimes families make decisions to take their children to school based on how much, you know, what they have and the capability that they have. Often that decision is very easy if they have little and the person to be taken to school is a girl. It's very easy, because they look at the girl and they say, if we give this girl out to that family and we marry her off, we get 7 cows or 10 cows or whatever number of cows, then, you know, we profit. What is the point of us spending to take her to school? And then the question, of course, to the system is, when these girls come to school, if we don't improve the education quality, then their coming to school will have been in vain, you know. So it's really a multi-pronged intervention that we need to think about to be able to reach those that are extremely marginalized and those that are most vulnerable.
Absolutely, and we're going to get into those solutions in a short while. I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Otieno, about the situation, not only being in far-flung areas. In this city, in the city areas, we have urban settlements that in many cases, experience similar challenges when it comes to the girl child or children living with disabilities. Paint us a picture of that.
Now, the issue of children living with disabilities is one that is very close to my heart, because as Jesse, we are currently actually doing a project in that. And what we are trying to do is to deal with the whole issue around access to learning materials. And we are looking at issues of how do you support children with disabilities to access written materials, so accessible digital textbooks. But the elephant in the room is actually the issue around assistive technologies. That these are children, particularly the ones living with disability, these are children with special needs. So much as the Kenyan education system has a policy where we are moving from special schools to integrated schools, where they go to school with the other students who do not have a disability, the problem has been, again, goes back to financing and resourcing for the equipment. If you are talking about a braille machine.
Yeah.
If you are talking about what we call an orbit reader.
Sure.
If you're talking about the special keyboards that can be used by children who don't have limbs, it just makes access to education impossible. If you're talking about the net cost of just bringing one child with special needs to school, it is something that the government should come in. Of course, the government gives what we call a top-up for the capitation grant to schools for children with disabilities. But that is not enough if we are talking about an orbit reader, which is $5,000 one piece. So I think what needs to be done, we have to equip our schools, we have to improve the school environment in such a way that if we are talking about integration, then there is a unit that can be able to support, particularly the most common forms of disabilities. And the issue of the divide around the socioeconomic divide, even in cities themselves, there is always the assumption that all children in Nairobi will access a television set or a radio. But the reality isn't that. And actually that is the challenge that was. KCD did very well in coming up with programs, with radio programs during the, when COVID had just set in.
During the lockdown.
But there are still a lot of children, even in urban centers, who are not able to access this.
Absolutely.
So how do we, first of all, build an infrastructure that is more futuristic and not one that is probably, reactive? So that access to ICTs, for example, education through ICTs and community learning setups should be things that actually exist within our system.
Now, so as the government tries and strives to put together, or rather see through reforms and integrate ICT into our education sector, but then you're painting a picture of some very basic things that we don't have. Should focus be on these things first before we can focus on reforms, or can we do both at the same time? What should be the approach? I'd like you to...
The whole drive or target of education for all has been a clarion call that has been happening from the early 90s.
And it's noble.
And it's noble. And Kenya, as a country, has committed to the SDGs, and SDG 4 is very particular about access to quality education and lifelong learning. So we cannot afford to leave any child behind. Education is a public good. The government is doing... have tried to do something. They need to do more, but also it calls for other development actors and even communities and parents to begin now to really take their role seriously and begin to see how is it that they can be able to complement what the government is doing.
What do you think, Dr. Jepkemei, when it comes to that? Are we trying to leapfrog technology and reform instead of just focusing on some of the basics?
I think it is possible to even look at technology as a basic part of the system. But I think the biggest, for me, I think the main thing is we need to think about the philosophy of education in this country. Why are we educating to begin with? So that even as the Constitution provides for education as a right for every child, we ensure that it is actually every child and not just children who are in the highly endowed regions and so on. So first of all, we need to really, really think about this idea of education as a public good. That it is not only meant for those whose parents are well off or are working like ourselves, but that every child is actually able to get the very minimum, we need to set some minimum standard where every child should be able to access that education. When you go to some parts of this country, like I travel quite a bit, if you go to Bungoma, it's not considered marginalized, but you will find classrooms that are made of mud. So then you ask yourself, okay, so what would be the priority here? Is the priority to bring in the tablet, or the priority to make sure that the learning environment is conducive to learning for the children? Dusty classes, you have 100 kids in one class and one teacher. There can't be quality of education coming out of an environment like that. So if we took education as public good, the first thing that we would take as public servants is that we are the stewards of the Kenyan people. And therefore, the Kenyan people expect that we will be able to put in place programs that ensure that every child is able to access at least the bare minimum quality that we think will enable that child to actually learn.
Right.
And then we move from there.
Yeah, and you, as you talk about that, it just paints, or rather reminds us that very different localities in this country have very unique problems, sets of problems. Absolutely. Do you think devolution would have been the solution to this?
I have personally wondered whether education should be a devolved one of the devolved tasks. But again, looking at how the counties are running, I kind of say, okay, maybe
safer not.
Yeah, maybe not. But yes, certainly a country that is as large as ours, and with a centralized education system, it is not possible for Jogoo House to be able to provide contextual solutions to all the areas, right?
Yes.
And therefore, I do feel that the county government should be able to at least provide, if not resources, at least provide forums where the policymakers can be able to access the information about what is best for those particular counties, for example.
Absolutely. Now, Mr. Otieno, one thing that was revealed from 2020-2021 due to the pandemic was the fact that schools are in fact safe spaces for children. Explain to us what that says about society and what we need to be focusing on with that revelation.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Trix. I alluded to that when I said that it's not only our education systems that were brought into sharp focus because of the COVID, but it was about our role as a community, as a society, in furthering, one, the development of children, but also learning. Yeah. And so the school in its own, I mean, it is so telling that within 9 months, we could have almost 30% of students being, becoming, pregnant at an early stage, dropping out of school. Yeah. What it simply means that we don't have child safeguarding mechanisms in our societies. Maybe also as parents, we don't engage much in the growth and development of our children, as it were. But of course, you would also excuse parents because they have got a lot of other things that they are battling with. Yeah. But I think also there is a fundamental issue which started when the whole free primary education started in Kenya. We began to see, the parents feeling like their role is almost
their role
to teachers, and because you don't pay, and it's the work of the government to be able to do that. Which brings to sharp focus as a society, what is, for instance, the role of the boards of management? Do we probably need to rethink this? Yeah. Because one of the things that needs to be trickling to parents is knowledge and information around how do you make the community just a safe place. Okay. In urban centers, our neighborhoods, how do we make these neighborhoods to be safe for children to not only grow and enjoy their childhood, but also to be able to recognize and focus on education.
Now, Dr. Jeb Kemei, it's not just about the safety of children in terms of sexual abuse and SGBV, even food. Food,
yes. Yeah, absolutely. So for most kids in those marginalized communities, school is where they escape the gender-based violence. Yeah. School is where they are affirmed by the teacher, and also school is where they get that one meal a day that will sustain them. And so, therefore, during the pandemic and the closure of schools really dealt a blow to these families, and it's a product of poverty. I don't think that there are parents who just decide that we are not going to feed our children. Kids, it's because of that marginalization. So if there is a drought, what else do you expect parents in Turkana to feed their children with if their animals are dying and they don't have? So the whole problem of marginalization needs to be looked into. It is a political problem, and it requires a political solution. Then we can now begin to trickle down those solutions into educational solutions and family solutions.
Absolutely, and this being an election year, hopefully we shall be voting with the hopes that some of these things can be solved. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeb Kemei, as well as Mr. Otieno, for joining us this evening. That draws Front Row to a close. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's continue the discussion online. My name is Trix Ingado. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your evening.